The apartment was quiet, almost painfully so. Every evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the narrow hallway of her high-rise building, Emma sat on the edge of her couch, staring at her phone. She had a ritual now, a ritual she didn't quite understand herself. It always began the same way. At precisely 9:03 p.m., she picked up the receiver and dialed 911. She didn't know why she chose that exact minute. Maybe it felt safer, predictable. Maybe it was the only way she could convince herself that someone was out there, listening, ready to intervene if the world outside her walls ever turned dangerous. The first few calls were short, almost perfunctory. "Hello, everything's fine. No emergency, just, I don't know. I'm okay." She hung up quickly, her heart racing, cheeks burning with embarrassment. She never stayed on the line long enough for the dispatcher to suspect anything, and the anonymity gave her a tiny sense of relief. Over the following weeks, the calls grew longer. Emma started telling small, mundane stories about her day, the kind of stories she would never share with anyone else. How she watched the sunlight hit the floor in the morning, how the elevator made a strange rattling sound, how she burned her toast that afternoon. She spoke in careful, measured tones, never revealing too much, never revealing herself. At first, she thought the calls were harmless. Therapy, maybe, disguised in numbers and voices she would never meet. But then, a strange feeling began to creep over her. Something in her mind whispered that she wasn't calling just for comfort. She was calling because she feared something, a danger she couldn't see, but somehow knew was there, waiting. Her friends never noticed the pattern. They assumed she was a little eccentric, a little private, maybe a little lonely. No one asked why she avoided weekends, why she rarely attended gatherings, or why her nights were devoted to whispered conversations with strangers over the phone. And yet, Emma couldn't stop. There was a strange kind of solace in the act of dialing 911, a strange power in speaking into the void and knowing someone, somewhere, might respond. She imagined the dispatcher's voice, calm and professional, a lifeline she could cling to. One night, the call took an unexpected turn. She was describing the faint hum of the city below her apartment, the muffled sounds of cars, footsteps, and distant sirens, when she noticed something odd. A pattern, a rhythm in the noises outside her window, almost like someone pacing, waiting. She paused, holding her breath, straining to hear. The dispatcher asked if she needed help. Emma hesitated. She didn't know if she did, not really. But the fear in her chest tightened, relentless. She whispered, "There's someone. Or something. I don't know. It sits there." The line went silent for a moment, longer than it should have. Then the dispatcher spoke again, calm, unwavering. "Ma'am, you're safe. Are you sure you're okay?" Emma didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure she was. Her gaze wandered to the window, and for the first time, she noticed a shadow on the sidewalk below, a figure, tall, motionless, almost too still to be real. She blinked and it was gone. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the couch, phone in hand, listening. Every sound became amplified. The creak of the radiator, the faint scratching from the neighbor's apartment, the distant wail of a siren. She felt exposed, as if the city itself was watching her. By morning, the fear had not faded. It had only grown, crawling beneath her skin, settling in her bones. And yet, when the clock struck 9:03 p.m., she picked up the phone again. The next week, she noticed the dispatcher's voice had changed. Different tone, slightly softer, almost familiar. Emma tried not to think too much about it, tried to convince herself that it was a coincidence. But deep down, she wondered, had they noticed her pattern? Were they watching? Every call became a balancing act between relief and terror. Emma found herself revealing more than she intended, small confessions, tiny truths about her life, her loneliness, the emptiness she carried. And with each revelation, the shadow outside seemed to grow, creeping closer in her imagination, testing the limits of her bravery. One evening, as the autumn wind rattled the windows and scattered leaves against the glass, she whispered something she had never said aloud before. "I'm afraid someone is coming for me, and I don't know if I can stop it." The dispatcher didn't respond immediately. Emma could hear the faint click of typing, the sound of someone on the other end taking notes. Then, softly, almost too softly to be heard over the hum of her apartment, the voice said, "Stay calm. You're not alone." Emma's hand trembled, and for the first time, she didn't hang up. She sat, gripping the phone, listening to the unseen presence on the other side. Somewhere in that moment, she realized something terrifying. It wasn't the city she feared. It wasn't the shadow outside her window. It was herself. The part of her that had always been listening, always been waiting, always been calling. The calls continued night after night, each one pulling her deeper into a labyrinth of fear and fascination. She began to see patterns in the city sounds, imagine stories for every passerby, every distant laugh, every echoing footstep. And each night, when she finally put the phone down, she felt both stronger and weaker, braver and smaller, more alive and more afraid than before. It was a delicate, dangerous ritual, one she could not break. And the city outside, indifferent and sprawling, kept its secrets well, hiding the truth that no one had yet discovered, waiting for the night when Emma would finally understand why she was calling and why someone, or something, was listening. It was a delicate, dangerous ritual, one she could not break. The nights began to change. Emma noticed a subtle shift in the rhythm of the city, a pulse she hadn't perceived before. The distant sirens didn't feel random. They seemed almost deliberate, as if signaling something only she could sense. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like the center of an unseen web, the strands tugging at her thoughts. On one particularly cold night, she heard a faint tapping at the window. At first, she thought it was the wind, or perhaps a branch brushing against the glass. But the tapping persisted, irregular and soft, almost like a code. Her heart pounded as she approached slowly, hand gripping the phone. 911, she whispered before dialing, her voice shaky. The dispatcher answered almost instantly, the familiarity of the voice giving her a small measure of comfort. "Hello, Emma. What's happening tonight?" "There's someone outside," she said, her eyes scanning the darkened street. "I hear tapping. I don't know who it is." There was a pause on the other end. The dispatcher's calm tone remained unchanged, but there was an edge of curiosity now. "Stay where you are. Keep your distance. Can you describe anything else?" Emma swallowed, trying to steady herself. "It's irregular. Not like footsteps. Not like the usual sounds. It's like it's waiting for me to notice it." The line was silent for a moment, and then softly, almost too quiet for her to hear clearly, the dispatcher said, "It's okay, Emma. Just keep observing. Tell me everything you see." For the next hour, she detailed the shadows, the subtle movements of passers-by, the way the wind carried faint whispers that seemed to linger too long in the corners of her room. She spoke as if painting a picture, as if the act of telling was a shield against the creeping fear. When the tapping finally stopped, Emma felt a strange emptiness, a void where the tension had been. But relief did not come. Instead, a question began to form in her mind. Why her? Why now? The next evening, she couldn't resist the pull of the ritual. She dialed again at 9:03 p.m., her hand steady despite the unease knotting her stomach. "It's happening again," she said almost immediately. "I think someone knows I'm watching. Or listening. Or both." The dispatcher didn't interrupt. Instead, they asked gently, "Can you tell me what they look like? Anything at all?" Emma hesitated, unsure if she should speak the truth. There was a part of her that feared what she might admit aloud. But the need to be understood, to be seen, was stronger than her fear. "I don't see them fully. Just glimpses. Shadows stretching too long. Movements that don't belong to anyone I know." Silence stretched across the line. Then, slowly, the dispatcher spoke. "Emma, you're noticing things most people don't. You have a perception others lack. That's why you're safe and why you feel the fear. But remember, perception can be both a gift and a burden." Emma listened, heart racing. She had never thought of her fear as a gift. She had only known panic, isolation, and obsession. But the idea that her mind could perceive something others couldn't, it was a revelation that both thrilled and terrified her. Over the following nights, the calls became more structured. Emma began documenting everything: timestamps of the noises, patterns in the shadows, small variations in the wind. She realized that each night had its own rhythm, its own language, and if she could decipher it, perhaps she could finally understand why she was the one calling and why someone or something was listening. Then came the night that changed everything. A single, deliberate knock, not at her window, not from outside, but from within the building itself. Emma froze, counting the beats. It was methodical, not random. Her phone trembled in her hand as she dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "This time it's inside," she whispered, barely audible. Someone is in the building. I don't know where. I just hear them." The dispatcher instructed her to stay calm, to lock the doors, to stay on the line. But Emma's mind raced. How could they get inside without being seen? She had checked all the locks, all the entry points, and yet the knocking continued, echoing faintly, as if the walls themselves had become a conduit for an invisible presence. Hours passed. Emma spoke constantly into the line, describing everything. By the end of the night, exhaustion wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She finally allowed herself to close her eyes, sitting upright, phone pressed to her ear, the sounds of the building now just faint murmurs. And as she drifted into a light, restless sleep, she dreamt of a figure, a shadow taller than any person should be, standing silently in her apartment. Its eyes glowed faintly, observing, waiting. She awoke with a start, heart racing, unsure if the tapping she had felt was real or only a shadow of her mind. But one truth had begun to settle in her consciousness. The calls were no longer about relief or fear alone. They were about understanding. The shadows, the tapping, the whispers, they were part of something much larger, something that was testing her, guiding her, pushing her toward a revelation she couldn't yet comprehend. And the city outside, indifferent and sprawling, continued to hide its secrets well, waiting for the night when Emma would confront the full truth of why she was the one calling and why someone, or something, was listening. And the calls were no longer about relief or fear alone. They were about understanding. The shadows, the tapping, the whispers, they were part of something much larger, something that was testing her, guiding her, pushing her toward a revelation she couldn't yet comprehend. Emma woke the next morning feeling hollow, as if the night had stolen something from her. The city below was quiet, almost deceptively calm, but she knew better. She had felt it, the presence, the careful observation. She moved through her apartment cautiously, checking every lock, every corner, every small shadow that might hide an intruder. By mid-afternoon, her nerves had not settled. Emma paced the small living room, her thoughts spinning. The calls had begun to occupy her entire existence. She hadn't told anyone, not even her closest friends. She feared they wouldn't understand, that they would dismiss her experiences as paranoia. And part of her knew they might be right. Her own mind could be playing tricks, conjuring shadows where none existed. At precisely 9:03 p.m., as always, she lifted the phone. But tonight, something was different. Before she could even speak, the line was answered by the dispatcher with a tone she had never heard before. Urgent, almost tense. "Emma, you need to stay still. Don't move. Don't look away from the center of your room." A shiver ran down her spine. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Something is here with you," the dispatcher replied. "We're seeing it. I can't explain fully, but trust me, just observe. Don't react. Don't run." Emma's pulse raced. Her apartment, normally a sanctuary, felt suddenly alien, almost alive. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch unnaturally, crawling along the floor as if moving toward her. The soft tapping had returned, but this time it was not at the windows. It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor itself, surrounding her. She gripped the phone tighter, struggling to breathe. I see it," she whispered. A figure tall just standing there. The dispatcher stayed silent for a moment, letting her speak, letting her narrate. Then they said softly, "Good. Keep watching. Describe everything you see. Don't make assumptions. Only observe." Emma's eyes focused. The figure was shrouded in darkness, featureless, but somehow she felt it was intelligent, aware. It moved in small, deliberate steps, yet the shadows it cast were larger than any human should produce. She noticed subtle details, the rhythm of its movements, the way it seemed to pause when she blinked, almost mocking her attempts to understand it. As minutes stretched into hours, Emma began to feel a strange connection, as if the figure was communicating without words. Thoughts, images, and emotions flitted through her mind, unbidden, as though it was sharing memories, warnings, and fragments of truth. The dispatcher guided her through the observation, helping her focus, helping her stay grounded. Emma realized she was no longer afraid in the conventional sense. Instead, she felt a mixture of awe and terror, fascination and dread. Suddenly, the figure moved closer, or at least that's how it appeared. The shadows shifted, the tapping intensified, and Emma could swear she saw a faint outline of a face, a hint of recognition. But just as quickly as it appeared, it receded into the darkness, leaving only the echo of its presence. Emma slumped against the wall, exhausted but exhilarated. She knew this was just the beginning. The figure was not a threat in the traditional sense. It was something else entirely, something beyond explanation. And yet, she could feel that understanding it was essential. For the next several nights, the pattern continued. Each encounter was more intense, more revealing. Emma began to document the figure's movements, the sounds, the rhythms. She noticed that the city itself seemed to react, subtle changes in traffic, lights flickering, distant sirens harmonizing with the presence in ways that felt deliberate, almost orchestrated. Through it all, she clung to the dispatcher's calm voice, a lifeline in a storm of incomprehensible phenomena. Emma began to understand that the calls were not just about reporting fear. They were about perceiving, comprehending, and surviving in a reality that was stranger than she had ever imagined. One night, as the moonlight slanted across her apartment floor, the figure approached again. Emma felt a rush of adrenaline, her body alert, her senses heightened. And then, finally, she heard it, not a voice, but a thought, a presence in her mind. "You are ready." Emma froze. Ready for what? The words echoed in her head, resonating in ways that felt ancient and urgent. She looked at the shadows, the walls, the faint glow of streetlights outside. Everything seemed alive, waiting, expecting. And in that moment, Emma understood. The city, the shadows, the calls, they were all leading her somewhere. She didn't yet know where or why, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She could not stop now. The ritual, the fear, the presence, they were part of a journey she had no choice but to follow. And the night stretched on, alive with possibilities, mysteries, and the promise of revelation. And in that moment, Emma understood. The city, the shadows, the calls, they were all leading her somewhere. She didn't yet know where or why, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She could not stop now. The night air pressed against the windows, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. Emma sat on her couch, phone in hand, listening for the familiar, reassuring voice of the dispatcher. But tonight felt different. The line was silent, no instructions, no guidance. It was as if she had crossed a threshold, alone, yet not alone. Suddenly, a soft, deliberate movement came from the corner of her apartment. The figure appeared, not as a shadow, but faintly illuminated, almost translucent. Emma's heart raced, but her hands did not tremble. She was ready. "You've come," she whispered, more to herself than to the figure. It responded, not with words, but with understanding. Images, memories, emotions flooded her mind. She saw herself as a child, always aware, always sensitive to the small shifts in the world around her. She saw the city as a living organism, watching, testing, selecting. And she saw that she had been chosen, not at random, but because she could perceive what others could not. The dispatcher's voice returned softly, echoing in her mind rather than over the phone. You are the observer, the listener, the one who can see beyond the surface. Emma's thoughts raced. But why me? Why now? The figure seemed to bend closer, and she felt a connection, an understanding without words. She realized that the tapping, the shadows, the whispers had been a language all along, guiding her to this moment. The city had been speaking, and she was the only one capable of understanding. As the night stretched on, the figure revealed more. It showed her places, events, hidden truths, crimes that had gone unnoticed, emergencies averted by someone unseen, lives saved silently. Emma understood that her calls, her observation, had not been random acts of fear. They had been preparation. Every call had sharpened her senses, strengthened her perception, honed her ability to notice patterns. By dawn, Emma was exhausted but transformed. The apartment, the city, even herself felt different. She was no longer just a woman afraid of shadows. She was a sentinel, a guardian of sorts, a witness to the hidden layers of the world around her. The figure receded, leaving a subtle warmth where it had stood. The tapping ceased. The shadows returned to their normal patterns. Emma sat quietly, absorbing the enormity of what had transpired. She realized that life would never return to the way it had been. But she was ready for it. She understood now that perception was both a gift and a responsibility. In the days that followed, Emma continued her nightly calls. But the fear was gone. She spoke calmly, methodically, observing, recording, connecting. She began to see patterns in the city, in people, in events. She could anticipate small dangers, notice subtle cues, and sometimes intervene, even from afar. Her friends noticed a change. She was quieter, more focused, more present in ways they couldn't fully explain. Emma never shared the full truth. It was a secret only she, the dispatcher, and the figure understood. And when the city slept, when the streets emptied and the wind whispered through the trees, Emma's phone would ring, or she would lift to herself, dialing 911 at precisely 9:03 p.m. And she would speak, not out of fear, not out of loneliness, but because she knew that someone or something was listening. And she, in turn, was finally ready to listen back. The ritual that had begun as an act of trembling uncertainty had become a mission, a purpose. And the city, indifferent and sprawling, continued to keep its secrets, but Emma was no longer afraid of them. She had become part of the pattern, part of the rhythm, part of the unseen web that connected all things. And for the first time, she smiled, understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries come not from seeking, but from listening, truly listening, to the world around you. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you love real, exciting, and mind-blowing stories, you are in the right place. Every story here brings a new secret, a new lesson, and a new truth. If this video touches you even a little, hit that like button, it means the world to me. Share your thoughts in the comments, your voice matters. And for more powerful, amazing stories, subscribe now, don't miss a single one. Remember, this isn't just a channel, it's a world of stories.